Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson. You're at the intersection. Fascinating thing, intersections. We go through many of them every day, and the way we navigate these determines the trajectory of our day and of our life. This is a us-centric topic, I guess, today, right? We're going to talk about why we write. We each have a book now that I finally got one myself. I know you're a lot more prolific, but, so what's the point?
You know, as I was thinking about this morning, why we write, right? I think that not just you and I, but any author has a song within their heart that they want to share. And they want that song to have some impact on humanity, whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's instructional, right? And we just want to be able to share our ideas to be able to hopefully make humanity better, that somebody would see or read our work and it would make their day or their life a little bit better. That's kind of, I think, why we write.
It's interesting. I'll take it way back, not just to books, but one of the things that I've done throughout my whole life in terms of writing is I'm a fairly prolific note taker. Whether it's a part of class, I'm taking notes, or maybe I'm reading a book, I'm taking notes, highlighting, writing things down. Maybe it's just journaling. Maybe it's part of meetings. I'm making notes. It helps me think better to actually get it on paper. And that part of the process has been really important for me. And at some point, I'll go back. And one of the things I do with writing is, weekly or so, or sometimes more, or sometimes a little less, depending on the volume, I go back and look at those thoughts and those patterns, and it helps me figure out what to do maybe, or how to do things better, or where I am at a given time. And one day I think maybe I got this whole big stack of notebooks and I'll go back through, because the fascinating thing, one of the examples I'll give is not too long after I got laid off, I went back and I looked at my notes from a year prior. And I looked, and word for word, I was seeing that as a strong possibility. I was seeing that as, what should I do? I was going through, do I really care? Going through, what does it mean? So that thought process was all, basically I had prepared myself for that to actually happen. But I didn't, it was almost like in my face obvious when I went back and read it. But I didn't remember it if I hadn't written it down.
Hindsight's always 20/20, right? And so I started journaling a little bit more and taking notes. And I like to, if I'm reading, or I'll take little notes. But I've met people like yourself and some other guys, when they sit down to read, they automatically open a book to take notes. And it's like they jot down everything. And I don't necessarily do that. I'll highlight. But I found value in that. If I'm looking at a YouTube piece, and it's especially if it's historical, I'm going to jot down. And what I find myself doing is, as I go back and I take a look at my notes, I'm looking at the concepts, the highlights of it, right? And then I'm asking myself, can I create any concepts out of this? And I like to play with acronyms. And so I'm looking at it and I'm trying to say, what can I create to this and add to this and make this something, of a little bit more value, at least, so that maybe I can understand better. And then if I decide to write something about it so that others can understand it better as well. But, when I did my first book, I wasn't really thinking about writing a book. I just was jotting some things down. And I got to a point in my professional career where I said, you know what, I'm going to turn this into a book. And I remember getting up. I was living in Columbus, Ohio. And I remember getting up for at least 2 weeks, somewhere around 3 a.m. in the morning, and writing from 3 a.m. to 7, and going through the document and making sure it was okay, And I did that for about 2 weeks, and I said, now I'm ready, because I knew that I was getting ready to make a professional move, and that move was going to be leaving the organization I was with and going out on my own. So now is the time. There was a sense of urgency with that.
That was good timing for you. And my book turns out to be pretty good timing for me this time, that it was actually underway, had been underway, and kind of sitting around thinking, well, when do we put this thing out? Talking with the publisher, and, so finally said, well, I guess it's good now as any. So, it's going out this week. So actually it's live on Amazon now, the Do You Speak Patient. And Thursday is my official Amazon book day, so I'm excited about it. I don't even know what that means, but I'm learning.
Awesome. Yeah, it's all a learning process. To be able to take your thoughts, you put them to paper, and you're writing them in hopes that it's going to have a contribution, for someone else, right? That they can take it and learn from it, and all your experience as an executive, as a surgeon, and all that you've seen and all you've been able to reflect on. And then for me, it's like, okay, I was self-employed, went back into the corporate setting. Now I'm coming back out. So that whole transformation, right? That whole piece. And, as the listening audience, you can see the background. We have the books up there. But I remember as I was transitioning to do the co-creation piece, our friend Mitchell Levy, we were just having a conversation, and I tossed out 7 letters to him, an acronym. And well, at the time, I didn't realize it was an acronym. And so I'm talking about how I see things from a business perspective, and I'm giving him these keywords that are important to me. And he sits down and he says, this is recipe. I'm like, wow. I didn't recognize it was an acronym, right? And so, and that was how this whole thing kind of began with the second book. So, interesting process.
It really is, and I had a similar experience with Mitchell in terms of kind of coming up with a thought construct to put it in. It landed at "tell me," and that was based on a lot of how I introduced the patient visit by just an invitation to the patient to tell me what was going on with their health, and then it just went from there. I mean, all the ideas, all the concepts are in there, but having somebody to sort of talk through it with and sort of help crystallize it is really, I think, of huge value.
Yeah, it's of extreme value because, we like this saying, we're all over the place sometimes, right? Well, sometimes it's all over the place, and then you get that crystallization that happens, and, focus. We were talking about focus earlier, and then really understanding what this, the totality of the concept of transformational thinking or co-creation leadership, or do you speak patient, really getting it in such a way that people can read and understand the flow and understand the flow of it, right? And then, especially with co-creation and with do you speak patient, it's in the journal form, right? They're both in journal forms. And so, healthcare executive team could take your book into the boardroom with them every meeting they have and use it as an instruction guide around ensuring that your employees speak patient and that everybody knows what it means to speak patient, right? And then from a co-creation perspective, it's the same thing. How do we go in this boardroom and every time we're co-creating, because that's what business is about. It's about always co-creating. No man is an island, right? And we're not independent beings. We're interdependent, as you like to say.
Yeah, and speaking of interdependence, I think those two books are a particularly good pairing because when you look at healthcare systems in general, there are so many different skill sets now that are embedded in the organizations, and it has to be that way because of the complexity, even specialty to specialty. If you're a physician or if you're a nurse, it's floor to floor. You know, which area do you work in? Surgery? Do you work in behavioral health? Do you emergency? What and do you work in radiology? Do you work in laboratory science? So that and then all the regular parts of what it takes to be a human: food service, environmental services,
That's right.
facility services, all these kind of things. Those are all different layers of expertise, and each has their own language.
Yes.
And there's only partial overlap in terms of the commonality of those languages. So the language of a physician is different than the language of an executive, unless it happens to be a physician executive, and even then, it's a hybridized language, which is different than the language of a mechanical engineer who's keeping the facility plant going, or of a CFO or anybody in the finance team who's and on and on and on. So these two really work together because that process of co-creation across teams is what actually makes the medical care system work effectively or ineffectively. So if you find yourself in a situation as a patient where things are not going well, you can basically infer from that the system isn't working well. Right? Now, you can't necessarily diagnose why, but the proof is in the pudding of your experience, right? If it's got these problems, then what that means is that there's not a seamless system in place. It has hiccups.
That's right.
And it's only through that process of co-creating within the team that can get ironed out.
That's right. Absolutely. And a shameless little plug, in order to co-create so that you can speak patient, the first thing you have to do is think, right? So you got to be able to transform how you think as an organization, right? And because that's the root. I always like to say, you have thought, you have decisions, you have action, and then you have result. And if you want to change what your result is, you got to be able to change one of those top three. You got to change your thoughts, you got to change the decisions, which is going to lead to different decisions. It's going to lead to different actions. So that's where it all begins. That's at the very root of it all. And now when I co-create, I want to co-create and speak patient, giving a different mental model.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And and it also, in that process, it cycles back. So
Yes.
Especially in complex systems, what you see is, you see this thought phase that flows, like you say, through, decisions, performance and action, results. And then you got to perpetually cycle that back into thinking again. One of the things that's becoming really obvious now in complex industries, medical care being one of them, is that previously that thought work used to be, confined to a small group of people, either the strategy makers or, physician decision makers or what. But what we're finding out now is that's really not the way to do it, right? Is that everyone in that team is a thought partner.
That's right.
And then, but that doesn't mean you're thinking and making autonomous decisions all along the way. What it typically means is that you're going through this phase where you're thinking, you're making decisions of how you're going to do it. And then you go into a period of work. And that period is really where, okay, we're doing things the way we said we were going to do them. We're measuring it this way. This is what we expect to see. And then, you exit that phase with your product, your result, your outcomes, and say, okay, now how would we course adjust this? And then you circle back or cycle back into that thought phase where everybody in the team has an input because they've got a different view of how that execution phase went.
That's right. And that's interesting because we could have 10 people on a team, which means we might have 10 different ideas. But then what we do is we converge those 10 different ideas into one or two, maybe, right? Because those two, one or two, are going to be much better exponentially than either one of the 10, right? Singularly. And so when we understand that it's really about not 1 + 1 = 2, but we need 1 + 1 = 5. That's what we really need to get, because we really need to be thinking from an exponent. What the impact of the decisions that we're going to make and the changes or the transformations we're going to make, we really want them to be exponential or quantum versus, just incremental.
And that's the power of the co-creation process is that, everybody in the team is giving something of themselves to the way, right? Whatever the way is.
Yep.
So you've got the buy-in automatically. You've also really got, most of the time, a fundamentally different way
Right.
than what you would have had with a more limited decision-making process. And it's going to be better.
That's right.
And because you have such incredible buy-in from all the different stakeholders in the decision, then you really do, you at that point have planted the seed for a culture of coaching, for a culture where people step up to be responsible for the change that's needed to make it happen.
Yep,
Even if it's not their own, everyone feels bought into that, and they know that their role is whatever it is, that the team is counting on them, they're executing that way, and bam, it just flows. It's magical.
And that's the key phrase you said. They bought in, right? Nothing will work until that you get buy-in from everybody, and that's the importance of everybody's voice and them being heard and being able to make a contribution. Because as human beings, what we really want to be able to do is be able to make a contribution to something, right? We want to feel important, and that contribution to my voice being heard makes me feel important. I had something to do with the end result of what this decision was, right? Or maybe I didn't, maybe my idea wasn't accepted, but at least I was able to express what my thoughts were. And that makes people feel good as well, because we do nothing alone, right? I don't care what it is we do. There's some level of co-creation that happens, even in writing the books. I know I shared my content with others and say, hey, read this and tell me what you think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then come back to me, and if you give me a different concept that might need to go in a book or just the whole proofreading process, I want to be able to know, give me some feedback.
Right. And, one of the things that I use writing for as well, again, not even books, maybe it's a social media post, maybe it's a blog type post, maybe it's something that I write to put out in an organization or something like that, of that nature. Some of that is to elicit ideas, right? And that can take different, it can be a provocative thought, or it can just be a straight question. Lots of different forms that can take. But one of the things I think is really interesting, the way things are now, is that folks actually are so much more comfortable putting what seem to be their truer thoughts into a near third person format online. That you can learn a lot, and you can have a pretty robust discussion. Sometimes folks get a little sensitive out there, or get real opinionated, but a lot of times not. A lot of times, if the discussion goes well, we're in the MG100 community is one that's kind of like that, right? When people add to the dialogue of a given social media post, particularly on LinkedIn, and that's really helpful, because it shows the importance of writing what you thought, putting it out there, because then you get people generously sharing back different ways. So it's a whole nother way of co-creating.
Yeah, it sure is, because oftentimes you'll see someone respond to your post and they'll be like, wow, I never thought about it from that perspective, which leads to a whole different series of kind of thoughts. And then you'll read it and you'll say, well, I never thought about it. And so now I go off on this whole different process of what those thoughts are. And so you begin to see the amalgamation of all of these thoughts come together, and it creating different perspectives, right? Different thoughts. And that's the beauty, of it all. When you come from a perspective of it's about learning and educating versus being opinionated, right? That really helps in the posting. And I've had opportunities where people say, well, Terry, we'd like for you to speak to our organization based upon a particular type of post and a particular subject matter, right? And so it's quite interesting because you get the opportunity to touch people across the globe and give them a different perspective and learn a different perspective, which adds value to all of us as human beings.
And, it's an act of courage to write what you think and include it with an invitation for others to, either contest it or add to it, enhance it, refine it. That really, I think, is an act of courage, and it gets us to a concept that I know you and I have both studied a whole lot recently, is that, just because we've written it, just because we have expertise, just because that's our opinion, just because that's our reality, doesn't mean it's the
That's right.
reality. And I mean, you can make a pretty strong argument that there actually is no the reality. We live in a world where, the space-time continuum, everyone's reality has subtle differences, sometimes profound differences. And having respect enough for not only your own beliefs, but for the beliefs of others to even enter into that discussion, I think is a really powerful thing to do, and it gives us a chance to close some gaps that are in need of closure.
That's right. I agree. That my reality is my reality and your reality is your reality. Now let's have a conversation about this and to see what a reality still is, not the reality, but it's a reality given what your reality is and what mine is. And then the alternate reality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the powerful concept, because the truth of it is you got a couple of different realities on the same thing, as do I. It's like the old joke, you get 5 surgeons in a room, how many opinions you going to have? 7 or 8 at least. Right. Because it just is, we have to put so much assumption into decision-making processes, and every time you could just insert alternative reality in place of the word assumption, and we say, well, that's not even true for certain things. What about math and all that? Well, look at any organization's financial projections and budgets and all that, and accompanying every one of them is always a list of assumptions.
That's right.
This will hold true if even audits that are supposed to make sure that everything was done according to the book have tons of assumptions, right? You can just insert alternative reality into that, and it would be the same thing.
And then to add more complexity to it, what we talk about in transformational thinking is challenge all assumptions, right? Yeah. So we're baking in assumptions into these important financial documents, but then they have to be challenged, right? Which means once they're challenged, they also have to be defended, right? And so that brings about a whole nother dynamic of what's supposed to be absolute, right?
And it's fascinating because what you begin to see in that process is when the challenge is issued and the defense begins, that defense oftentimes has a lot of problems associated with it, right? It gets us stuck. It's you feel like you have to defend it as if it's your honor, sort of sometimes, when in reality, sometimes, the very nature of an assumption includes a certain likelihood that you're going to be wrong.
That's right. That's right.
You know, so you kind of start there
That's right.
and say, okay, I can get that challenge. This really didn't go like we expected. So what happened? How do I diagnose the issue? May not be a problem. May have worked out way better. I mean, I know I've seen that in many, many sets of financial projections, is that, you know, it's sort of the, you know, under promise and over deliver. And at the end of the day, you know, you outperform the projections and feel good about it. But you set it up that way. You knew that was going to happen. Should you really feel good about it?
That's
You know,
right. That's right. That's
and so it's this whole thing, you know, of understanding that it's all models. It's not.
That's all. That's all. That's all. It is all a model. You know, I've heard a lot of startups talk about the financial projections and how much money they're going to make, and you know how the market is ripe for this, and I have to remind them it's just a model. It doesn't necessarily mean that all the assumptions that you've made within your model are going to happen, right? Who predicted the pandemic? Well, some people kind of talked about this thing would happen, but at that particular time, then what happened to all the financial models, right? A lot they had to
Back
go
to ground zero.
Exactly. Yeah, because all of the assumptions were blown out of the water simply because these were the things that happened. And these weren't the quote unquote normal things that would happen in a normal economy. This economy was turned upside down. So now what happened to your assumption? And we know what, you know, assumption, assume, and all that kind of stuff.
It's another one of those acronyms you were talking about, right? Yeah. That's and it's fascinating. We have to do that in business, right? Like we have to put the assumptions in. We have to establish some sort of predictability. The magic really happens when, you know, we just don't get stuck on it when it doesn't happen.
That's right. That's right.
You know,
that's right.
that's when, you know, we need not, since we know we have to do that in the first place, you know, and yeah, we got sophisticated systems and we can get pretty close to it and all that. And then you have something like a pandemic that just changes everything, and other factors, other various crises, banking crises, other crises that, you know, that happen, change that. To the extent that we stay stuck, that we stay just, you know, this is where things have to be, you know, we can't make progress then. We have to really not be attached to the outcome, you know, but be attached to, you know, this is what we did, and, you know, well, let's reboot, let's retool everything and figure out how it's really going to be in this next model that we create. And for me, the writing process is sort of like that. You know, like at the beginning, I couldn't have told you that "Do you speak patient" is what I was going to come up with. You know, and the next one will be the same way, and the next one will be the same way. You get into the process and embrace what's happening in the present moment. Get help where you need it, and it works out.
Yep, that's right. You know, even in the process of writing, I remember just having conversations with people, and we've been having conversations, and someone would say something, and it would strike me, and I'm like, oh wow. And this is really affiliated with what I'm writing about. Now, let me go take some, let me go take some notes on this. Or I'm having a conversation with someone, and I'm like, wow, that would be an interesting topic to write about. You know, let me go do some research and dig into it and see what other types of literature is out there, you know, around this. And you know, I can tell you, I wanted to do work that I consider to be, I wanted to be timeless and something that people can always refer to. Do you speak patient? There's always going to be patience, right? It's even when we don't exist anymore, right? There's always going to be patience, right? So and there still has to be that communication to a patient by a healthcare worker, regardless of what area of healthcare you're in. And so people are always going to have to think. And we're always going to work together, right? So there's always going to be a level of co-creation. And so I consider all of the work here timeless work, right? That you can continue to just add on to. It's just a model or a guide that you can utilize to become better.
Yeah, and the cool thing about this is, you know, for the do you speak patient, I mean, the idea is for the reader to invest in themselves and do their own writing.
That's
and
right.
The ahas, just like your co-creation, and it's through that process that the growth happens,
That's
right?
right.
It's
That's right.
not that there's this timeless wisdom in here.
Right.
It's that there's these prompts that make us think.
Yes.
Like one of my favorite ahas in this particular book is the very first one, right, which says, as a medical professional, it's important to remember that patients are human beings, not just numerical data on a chart.
That's right.
And then a person can sit there and think about what that's meant in their career. They can consolidate in their mind how they navigate that particular reality.
That's right.
And the solutions that can come up, especially when you put it into minds that haven't been tainted by too much time in the system,
Mm-hmm.
bam, all of a sudden you get these breakthrough innovations.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side of the coin, you give it to somebody who's a salty veteran,
Mm-hmm.
and it helps reconnect them to why they were doing the thing in the first place.
That's right.
And one of the things that I will say, and I think I use it a lot in talks and different things, is that I'm really concerned right now for the entire medical care profession. My colleagues are in danger.
Mm-hmm.
It is a tough time to be in the industry as a part of that workforce, whether you're a frontline worker, a physician, an administrator, nurse, technologist. Doesn't really matter what your particular role is. It's a dangerous time to be in the industry because of the instability that we've seen in the wake of the pandemic and just the stresses of the job in general. But you know what that means. If it's dangerous for the workforce,
Mm-hmm.
it's dangerous for the patients.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It is dangerous for the patient, and it's dangerous for the workforce. And then I'm going to flip it just a little bit. With this danger comes opportunity.
100%.
Yep. With this danger comes opportunity, right? Opportunity to be able to think in innovatively and creatively ways for new solutions. Opportunity to co-create and lead differently, to see the industry differently. Opportunity to speak differently to your patients by understanding how and the verbiage that should be utilized and understanding that they are the North Star. So with the danger comes the opportunity to create something totally different that hasn't existed before, or as we know it as the healthcare industry. So, if we can see it from both perspectives, here's the danger, but now how do I need to be able to create a solution that's totally different, that's going to somewhat resolve all the challenges that we find within the dangers of it, right? So I can see the doom and the gloom, but man, I can see the upside too. And if we do this thing right from an upside perspective, we'll create something that's beneficial to everybody, because at some point in time in all of our lives, we're going to come in contact with the healthcare system.
For sure. And I think the real opportunity there is in the co-creation piece. And historically, complex industries like the medical system have a significant top-down decision-making structure. It's really time to upend that, because the knowledge is doubling every 70 days. No one can keep up with that. There are new dynamics that are floating in and out all the time. So we have to be more dynamic, and we have to have those different perspectives put together in different ways than what they ever have. And I don't really believe the solutions are out there yet to emulate other industries and make that work for healthcare either. I think that's just pure fallacy. But there are components that can be plugged into the new solution. And so how do you take those components, marry it with other existing components and put it together in a whole different way. It's really the ultimate outside the box exercise, because we're not, not delivering a good product. And right now what you see is, talking about why we write, there are plenty of people writing about the fact that it's not working well.
Right.
There are some folks that are writing about what they think ought to happen, but the work has to be done, right? Like, it's one thing to be a talking head. It's another thing to actually be able to put in place some things that move you along that path in a meaningful way. That's what we need.
When you speak of the work being done, when you look at nature, and more specifically, when you look at the whole process of going from caterpillar to butterfly, there's the beauty of the cocoon, right? Where you get in the messy middle, when the caterpillar all of a sudden goes through, and you look at it outside in the trees, and you're like, wow, man, that looks messy. But the whole time there's development that's happening in that cocoon, right? And if any of that development is upset, then the caterpillar never becomes the butterfly. So what organizations have to understand is, even though we might be in these times, the opportunity is to become the butterfly within the industry, but you have to do the work. So you have to develop your people. You have to ask them for new ideas. You have to be able to have the conversation around the new ideas and vet what are actually the ideas that can be implemented, right? We have to be able to look at technology and say, well, how does it benefit us, right? And you have to have the tough conversations, and you even have to have the chaotic conversations, because we know in chaos are patterns, and you got to be able to extract the patterns to get the information that you're looking for, to be able to apply it, for it to become knowledge. And knowledge will happen one of two ways. It'll be knowledge as it didn't work, and so it doesn't work, or it'll be knowledge that it does work, and you continue along the path. But you got to communicate. You got to communicate with the patients. You got to make them a part of the process. What did or didn't you like as a part of this process? Not that they don't do it now, but I don't know how serious they're taking it, because what's happening is we're still getting the same kind of responses out of patients. Regardless of all the surveys that the hospitals and the healthcare systems say they're doing, you're still getting people who are dissatisfied with the system for whatever reason, right? And you're not going to be able to please everybody, right? We all know that. But how can we co-create a system that's beneficial to everybody? And the only way to do that is to make sure that the community is a part of the process, that when the health industry or health institutions are developing these processes, right? It's about, I know you had some ideas about some things you wanted to do, wanted to do, around some clinics, right? And that's what it was really about. How do we build this thing the best that we know how, to include everybody's voice? And that's what's happening. And so as we write, we're thinking about provoking thought so everybody's voice can be heard.
That amplification is so important. It really is. And what we say, I'll give an example from industry insider. One of the friction points that we often have, there are lots of assumptions that go into it and that are problematic. We tend to try to apply technical solutions to people problems. And that may play out with, promoting certain technological solutions at a faster pace than the operational team is prepared to handle it. And so you end up with lots of workarounds and a non-system, basically, right? Like, people are having to do workarounds instead of being able to use the system as the system was designed. And it may or may not have been designed well for a given thing. And so until we kind of are able to take a step back and have the technological solutions and the people solutions be moving at the same pace, we're going to continue to struggle in that regard. That's it. there's just not going to be, in the imminent future, any magical tech solution to the problems we face in the medical industry, because most of the problems right now, frankly, are people problems.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's going to have to be dealt with on that basis first. And then once we do, it's kind of like for any change, one of the things that has to happen is you have to get fundamental things done right.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the fundamentals learned and done right can be a slow process at first.
Mm-hmm.
But the pace of everything else is so much more accelerated if you've gotten the fundamentals right in the first place.
Right.
So if we fail to really build it on the proper foundation, then all along the way we're going to have challenges. Whereas it's a slow is smooth, smooth is fast thing, right? And once you really get those fundamentals built in the right way, I mean, electronic medical record is one of those. It's been a debacle across the country, a really expensive one, which has basically created a Tower of Babel between all the different health systems, and the whole notion of interoperability is totally outside of vision of anybody, right? Like everyone knows it ought to be that way. As ubiquitous as information flow is, we can't seem to get it right in healthcare, and that creates a lot of problems. Well, that's a fundamental thing from the ground. So we got to go back and build that piece right.
And this is why we write, right? Because we want to inform people. We want to educate people. We want to let people know from an insider perspective, as you just did, what's really going on. And it's to provoke thought, right? And you provoke thought and to come up with viable solutions. But at the end of the day, there's one thing that has to happen for all of it to work, and that is you got to put in the work. Right, even when we're writing, right? Some people say, "Well, what happens when you get writer's block?" Well, you get up and you walk away from it. You put it down for a little bit. There's still a process to that, right? And then all of a sudden there'll be some inspiration or something will spark a thought, and you'll say, "Hey, I need to put this down." And then all of a sudden the flow comes again. And writers just write. I'm not going to consider myself a writer, but I just thought I had some ideas that I wanted to share with others and think about concepts, because I like to try to connect things together. I got a couple of ebooks out there now that tie business and music and leadership together. And it was only because I was having a conversation with a friend who actually is a musician, and then I was at a MG100 event, and they were talking about music, and they were telling the stories around how they wrote a song. Right, and seeing all those connections, and I was like, yeah, there's a rhythm to this thing, right? There's a process. The process and rhythm, the same thing, right? And so tying those concepts together, and saying, I can jot down a couple of things about this that might be able to connect the dots for people.
Yeah, I mean, you got 4 books. I think you can consider yourself a writer. That's fair. That's a fair thing. But it is that I like the way you talked about. Sometimes you do have to walk away from it, and that's kind of how our minds work, right? You've got all the mental chatter going. It kind of gets you going in a circle. So between the mental chatter of the thoughts and then the emotions that get evoked, sometimes you just gotta move away from that and get some outside environmental stimulus, the sort of the third input that we get. I think one of the concepts I've been kicking around lately, I know you have too, is we have 3 sets of inputs. We've got what's going on around us, the physical stimuli, what I'm hearing you say, what I'm seeing with my own 2 eyes, what I sense with any of the senses. Then I've got my thoughts. They're all over the place. All of ours are. No matter how linear we think they are, they're not really. And then we have our emotions, which are even sometimes harder to figure out for a lot of folks. And all those are 3 inputs that each of us has, but none of those 3 inputs are us.
Right.
right? We're aware
Right.
of those three.
Right.
Sometimes we get hung up and we go out and be one of them, right?
Right.
We go out and we
Right.
go out and be our
That's right.
emotion, or we
That's
go
right.
out and
That's
be
right.
our
That's
mental
right.
chatter, you
That's
know.
right.
And we have to kind of break that cycle and get back to that. Okay, I'm in here. I'm aware of all these things happening. Now let me just take a pause, take a breath,
Yeah.
and then allow things to get some clarity. And that's
Yeah.
a very powerful way
Yeah.
to conduct your writing.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. And you know, talking to different people from different backgrounds, it always stimulates some thoughts, especially if you're trying to see how all the dots connect, right? And so there have been people who have impacted my writing and had no idea that they impacted it, because there was something that they said. I was like, oh man, that's different, or novel, or at least I hadn't heard of it. And so I wonder how I can add this into, or give it this flavor, if you will, into the writing. It's always interesting, and I like to reflect on nature, right? One of my favorite questions is, what does nature teach me, you know, about this? That's why I use the analogy of the caterpillar to the butterfly, because that's actually what happens. It goes back to what Dr. Rao says: just bloom, and the bees will find you, right? Because I think that nature is the greatest teacher that we can have. You know, you go out there and you look at some of the stuff on either YouTube or TV, National Geographic, and it's wow. I was looking at a piece today before I came over, and it was interesting because this giraffe was running across the terrain, but there was a lion that was hunting, and so it jumps up at the giraffe, and the giraffe sees it, and the lion can't hold on, and so the giraffe ends up stumping the lion to death, right? I'm like, wow. You know, that's nature. This is the stuff that's happening out there every day that we're just not,
Right.
we're not seeing all the time. But then I think about, you know, what is nature really showing me about relationships, right? And how can I take that and bring it down to something meaningful from a relationship? You know, you can think about the predator, you know, that's out there, the types of predators, and the unseen, you know, predators, and then how do you overcome, you know, can see there's an obstacle in the way. I'm going straight and something gets in my path. How do I, you know, do I bowl over it? You know, do I swerve, do I go left or right? You know, how do I overcome it? And so it depends on the context that you put it in, that you see, and that stimulates writing as well, because there's a bit of innovativeness or creativity that comes, you know, being able to extract information from something that's abstract.
Yeah, it's all relational. That's
Yeah.
the thing. You know, we tend to think of things as concrete, right? But it's all really, you know, atoms and energy. And you talk
That's
about
right.
nature, and it's been around a lot longer than we have.
Yes.
You know, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and all these things have been happening for a really long time. And, you know, here we are. I mean, I just had a birthday. I'm 57.
Oh, yeah.
Who's a 57-year-old
yeah.
to question 4.5 billion years worth of events that have gotten me to this
Right.
point, right? And
Right.
and the fundamental message there, and one of the reasons why I write is just to help me accept the reality that I see at the time, right? And not to question that reality, because who am I to question it?
Right.
Right? A
Right.
50-year-old versus a 4.5 billion year
Right.
you know, process of this planet. Have to be humble enough to know there's a lot of stuff I don't quite understand.
That's right.
You
That's
know,
right. That's right.
But I can enjoy this time that I have in a relational aspect with other people, and that's really where that's really where things that we see as meaningful, I think I can speak for myself for sure, are always in the relational components
Yes.
of how things can happen.
Yes.
Enjoy processes, enjoy, you know, relationships,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're just thought partnerships sometimes, or whether it's, you know, maybe a business venture or some type of activity, a team.
Yep.
You know, it's
Yep.
all
It's all
relational.
That's right. That's right. It's all relational, and it's interesting that all the different experiences we have in life, how it was relationships that kind of created whatever those experiences were. Who was either in your life or not in your life, or who you just met, and you didn't know before. It's not coincidental. I tell people that I don't believe in coincidences. It happened for a particular reason. We go back energy and vibration and all that kind of stuff, right? It happens a particular way, and it's never by accident. We just sometimes have to figure out why, right? But yeah, everything is about relationship. Even when we talk about politics, right? We talk about business. I go into 11 P's in the transformational thinking, and those 11 P's are all around relationships and how we have to look at specific areas of our life and the relationships in order to think differently so that we can kind of be differently.
It's amazing because what we consider the hard sciences now are really looking, they really describe that phenomenon, whether you talk about Einstein's theory of relativity or even quantum physics right now. If you want to have your mind blown, read some of that. I mean, it's deep, but it ties back into Eastern mysticism. It ties back into what we would consider modern day Christianity. It all actually has a very common threads throughout.
Yes.
And the fundamental thing really is relational aspects of energy.
Yep, that's right. That's right. How do we as human beings become better thinkers, become better human beings, right? It's all related, because regardless of what you practice, it's a deep dive, right? You got to do the deep work, right? And when you do the deep work, it's all about humanity becoming better. How do I become better? How do I serve better? How do I think better? How do I act better? My values, all of those kinds of things. That's what it's really. You said it earlier. You said the way when you were describing the process. It's really the way. That's what it is. There's the way, regardless Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu. It's the way. Everybody they have to be able to choose the way that is best for them.
Yeah, and I think that really brings me up to almost a summary statement of why I write. And it's really just it is really just for the sake of writing, right? It is part of the way for me to answer those questions about myself. And all the, writing for me is self-work. And in leadership, I've talked about this a lot of times, and I truly believe it. All the work is self-work. You can't do anybody else's work. They can't do your work. The way you collide at different times, or the way you intersect at times, that can be a part of the journey. But each of our own respective work is to be done by us. And we can only accept help when we're ready.
That's right. That's right. And I'm going to say something here that's probably going to make you laugh, because I said it earlier before we started recording. I was talking about Reggie Jackson and asked him, Reggie, what were you thinking about in the field? And he said, the magnitude of me. So what you were just describing is the self-work. It's really about me. It's about the magnitude of me, right?
Absolutely.
It's that continued growth of me, in the context of how do I become better? And with Reggie, it was how do I become better so that I can help my team win? In the medical field, it's how does anyone become better to help the team win? And the team winning means that the patient is served at the highest level of service. How do I win in such a way that I become one of the best co-creators, so people want me to be a part of the team because of the value that I bring and the diverse thoughts that I bring to the table, right? And that ties into transformational thinking. How do I become the best possible thinker that I can, so that I can present different ideas that people never thought about, that provokes thought for them, that we create solutions that's better than what we could create individually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, we could go on with this discussion just about all day, thinking deep and figuring it out. But I want to really thank our listeners for sticking with us through the discussion, getting a little insight into how Terry and I think, why we write. And if you want to check out more of our podcast, go to unlikelyintersection.com or check out Unlikely Intersections on Facebook or YouTube. You can pick up me at docphilipbrown.com. There'll be links to the book on there, which is on Amazon right now as well. Or you can catch me on LinkedIn at Doc Philip Brown. And Terry, how about you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Terry Jackson, PhD. All of our books are on LinkedIn, on Amazon, and I probably have shared my covers on LinkedIn as well. But you can find all of ours on Amazon. And I would even say there's one other that accompanies the transformational thinking, and that is the transformational thinking workbook. And this workbook really will help you dive deep into how to think differently so that you can have different thoughts, you can make different decisions, take different actions, and come up with different type of results.
Because it's all about the work.
That's right. It's all about the work. Got to do the work.
We'll see you at the next intersection.